Welcome to Thorn's Jungle. In this video, I'm going to be debriefing my expedition to Sumatra to try and look for any evidence of the orang pendek. No doubt that's a primate footprint. I'm going to cover things like what I think the orang pendek actually is. I'm going to be going into some behind the scenes stuff that happened on that expedition that didn't make it into the video. I'm going to be discussing the foot and the footprints that I found and all sorts of cool things. If you want to watch that video, there it is there, because you might want to watch that before you watch this. So I went to Sumatra to look for any evidence of the orang pendek. Before I get into that expedition, I firstly want to let you know, if you don't already know who I am and what I do, here's just a brief outline of myself, my qualifications, my experience, etc. So I have qualifications in wildlife biology, primatology. I've worked with animals my entire life. I've traveled the world working with animals. I've spent loads of time in the jungle, a lot of time in the jungle actually, in many parts of the world. Jungles are my favorite places on earth. I was in a TV show called Kings of Pain, 2 seasons of that. That was on History Channel, where I got bitten and stung by some of the most painful animals on the planet to rate them on a pain index. It was a very fun show, but very painful. I've always had a fascination with cryptozoology, and I never wanted to be one of those cryptozoologists that just believed in everything. Okay, and there are a lot of cryptids out there. So I wanted to choose cryptids that I thought had a very good possibility of existing. And the orang pendek was one of probably 3 or 4 that I hold in high regard and have confidence that there is potential they could actually exist. The orang pendek for me seemed to be an easy thing to explore because it's very easy for me to get to Indonesia, especially Sumatra, from Western Australia. I'd done a lot of research into the orang pendek before I left. I came at it with a skeptical mind because that's how science should be approached. You shouldn't go in there believing that it exists, because then you're just going to convince yourself that it does, and that is biased towards, you know, what you're trying to accomplish. So I came at it with no expectations that I was going to find anything, especially after only, 5 nights, 6 days in that jungle, as if I'm going to see something so elusive as an orang pendek. I didn't think I would. I never once believed I would actually get a sighting of it. I pretty much went to Sumatra to check it out. To check out the orang pendek, get a layout of the land, and then if I feel that there is something worth further investigation, then I will plan an entire project. My guide, even when I told him what I was doing there, he took me aside, and he was such a sweet guy. He took me aside and he said, I feel kind of bad because we're probably not going to see the orang pendek. And I was like, mate, don't worry. I have no expectations of seeing this animal. Trust me. I just want to do a recon trip, get a feel of what the jungle's like, if there is any potential for an undiscovered ape to remain hidden in an area like that. And if I found some footprints, I would be on cloud 9, because even finding footprints would be incredibly lucky. So the place I investigated is an area that has a lot of sightings of orang pendek. It's not easy to get to, and it is a pretty arduous trek up that mountain and then back down. But it was awesome. I love the jungle, and I was on a cool mission. We did see other primates. We saw Sumatran Surili. There are a lot of siamang. So there are primates there. I'm not going to break down the entire trip. If you have watched that video, then you know what I'm talking about. You know how the trip sort of unfolded and what I found. That jungle is so thick and dense that it is very hard to penetrate. And the thing is, people always say, how can an ape, I mean, they say it about Bigfoot a lot, how can an ape that size go hidden for so long and undiscovered to science? Well, I'm going to not get into Bigfoot right now, but I'm going to look at the possibility of a 3 or 4 foot ape remaining undiscovered in an area like West Sumatra. If we look at the Tapanuli orangutan, for example, a species of orangutan that wasn't actually formally described as a separate species to the abelii, the Sumatran orangutan, till 2017. So south of Lake Toba, they knew there was a population of orangutan there since the 30s, I believe. But it wasn't until about 1997 that Western scientists actually laid eyes on this population of orangutan. Then it was discovered after genetic analysis on a bunch of different individual orangutans that the Tapanuli orangutan is a separate species to the abelii, which is the Sumatran orangutan living north of Lake Toba. Now, there are only about 800 at the most of these Tapanuli orangutans left in the wild. And they are found in an area less than 1,000 square kilometers in size. And it's a pretty hard quest to find the Tapanuli orangutans. So 800 at the most in an area 1,000 square kilometers, very difficult to find the Tapanuli orangutan. Let's look at the orang pendek. I can promise you there are probably fewer, a lot fewer, than 1,000 orang pendek knocking about in that jungle. And the jungle they are said to live in is 14,000 square kilometers in size. So it's hard enough finding an ape that we know exists in an area 14 times smaller than an area that the orang pendek is said to live in, and there is most likely fewer of them in that larger area. So that is a bloody challenge. There are people that have looked for the orang pendek for decades and not seen it. There are a few lucky people like Jeremy Holden and Debbie Marta, that's my Australian accent, Marta, that they've actually had sightings of the orang pendek, and they are very credible witnesses. There is not a doubt in my mind that they would just randomly make that up. Jeremy Holden's a very respected photographer, and Debbie's a very respected conservationist. I believe she's working in tiger conservation now, so why would they make something like that up? But it's certainly possible. It certainly is possible, but I don't think they made that up, okay? There is no way that I'm going to be lucky enough to lay eyes on the actual orang pendek. The odds are just so far against me. But I wanted to see the terrain, what food sources there were, what other animals are in the area. Because at the end of the day, this is an animal that is an obligate biped and a primate that is an obligate biped, which means for the majority of its life, it's spent walking on 2 legs. There are no other apes apart from humans that do that. I'm going to fast forward to when I found those prints. It was the last day. It wasn't our last day in the jungle, but it was our last day in that area of jungle. And then we had to kayak a best part of a day back across the lake, and weather was coming in and all sorts. So if I was to plaster cast those prints, they would have just got flooded out. I wouldn't have been able to go back and get them because by the time I got back to the other part of the jungle, we were kind of on our way out of the jungle and I had to leave. So all I could really do was get really good video footage close up of the print inside and out, and then convert that into a 3-dimensional scan, which actually turned out really well. The interesting thing is, my guide, he didn't really believe the orang pendek exists. He believed that it maybe once existed, but not anymore. So he was kind of skeptical throughout the whole thing until he started finding prints. After I found that first print, which was actually the best one of the lot, he started walking ahead and started finding more and more. He started finding little clues like mudslides where whatever's stepped on has sort of slid, mud that's flicked onto leaves as the animal walks. He found saplings that have been broken and moved apart, which requires hands. So he was very confused by this. He was like, oh. And I believe after that trip, after him seeing that, I believe that he became a believer. He was the one that actually set up the eyewitness interview. I don't know how he knew the guy. I think it was an old neighbor or something of his. But that was very eye-opening because this dude, and I will address this because there were a lot of comments about this, that eyewitnesses will make up stories to get money and things like that. I didn't pay this dude a cent. This guy sat with me for over an hour, gave me coffee, gave me biscuits. He didn't get a thing from me. He let me into his house and gave me his story, and I left. I didn't give him a thing. Why would somebody spend over an hour of their time just completely making up a story just for a laugh? And it was that descriptive, that elaborate, that how could he just couldn't, he wouldn't make that up. Who would? Okay, this guy's got better things to do. That was after we came out the jungle. I sat down and interviewed him. So that was after I found the prints. I will go into the actual print because what I did with that 3D scan, and it didn't turn out well. Okay, no, it was very difficult for me to find somebody that would print it. I finally found somebody that could print it because the files weren't, right, and had to be converted and all this jazz. I didn't have the best measurements, which is annoying because I actually managed to scale and get measurements after the 3D print. And also the guy that 3D printed it was like 17 years old, probably younger. He was still at school. But this is how it ended up. It's not the best. You can't really see much, but the heel would cut off there. There's that divergent hallux, the big toe, and then the other toes there. You can kind of see it better from that angle, but it doesn't actually do it justice because it makes the toe look longer than it is when that was actually just a shrub there and things like that. It's also a little bit bigger than the actual print. The actual print was a little bit smaller than my hand and not as big as that. But what I did do with the 3D scan is I did a whole bunch of technology stuff, which I'm not good at, but it ended up working out pretty well. I got this print. That print is actually what's on my shirt because I will get into my plans for the future. Now, as a guy that has seen gorillas in the wild, chimpanzees in the wild, I've seen their footprints. Like I've seen orangutans in the wild, I've seen their footprints as well. It is mind-blowing how ape-like this footprint was. Of course it's an ape, we're an ape, but it was crazy how, just obviously ape-like this was. Like I said, I've seen ape footprints before from apes we know exist. And this was just like nothing special, okay? It was nothing completely out there and nothing different to those footprints, which gave it way more credibility to me. I was like, that just looks like another ape, right? But what is that ape? There are a lot of theories out there. A big theory is that it's a bipedal orangutan or a branch of pongid, which is the orangutan. I don't think so, and here's why. A lot of Sumatrans, whether they live in West Sumatra or not, know what orangutans look like. There are no orangutans in West Sumatra, but people living in West Sumatra still know what orangutans look like. Of course they do. A lot of people know what orangutans look like. Another big thing is color of the hair rarely is orange like an orangutan. Nobody really describes the orang pendek as looking like an orangutan. That doesn't mean that years of evolution and things like that hasn't changed the color of an orangutan, and some of the morphology, maybe some of their, anatomy. And of course, if it is an obligate biped, it will structurally look different. Absolutely it would. But I just don't think it's an orangutan. I think it is a type of gibbon, or has evolved from gibbon-like ancestors. And I have a few reasons as to why I think this. One reason is gibbons, a lot of the time, will be dichromatic, which means they come in different colors. So gibbons like the La gibbon, also known as the white-handed gibbon, can range from black, blonde, brown, or anywhere really in between. And the males and females can both be either or either of those colors. There is male and female dichromatism, but there are a lot of species of gibbons that do show dichromatism. They do come in different colors. With the orang pendek, there are descriptions that vary from jet black to blonde to a honey color, which would match dichromatism that we already see in gibbons. And we do know there are species of gibbons that live in Sumatra. Now, one of the biggest questions raised here is, why would a gibbon or gibbon-like ancestor evolve to be terrestrial rather than arboreal? We do know gibbons are one of the most, if not the most, arboreal of the apes. I know they're lesser apes, but they are lesser to no ape. I hate that word. Gibbons are awesome. And they are true brachiators, which means they swing through the trees faster than a human can run. Why would a gibbon or something that has evolved to be arboreal now come down to the ground and be predominantly terrestrial? I don't know. There could have been environmental factors as to how that happened. There are fewer tigers in West Sumatra compared to other parts of Sumatra, but tigers are still there. I don't know. There could be various things involved with that. I mean, we don't even know why humans evolved to be obligate bipeds. There are theories out there, but we still don't know. Could it be you have now the ability to hold things and walk with things when you're bipedal? You can carry your infants better. You can observe higher to see if there are any potential predators. That wouldn't make sense with gibbons because you can't get any higher than some of the trees there. I don't know. I don't have the answers for everything. But I do think the orang pendek is some form of hylobatid, some form of gibbon or gibbon-like. I will get into the feet because one of my theories is that the feet shape and the prints that people find can change. There are a few variations in some of the footprints that have been described. Some of the footprints are your typical one, like I found, with the very ape-like structure, that divergent hallux, short toes, apart from that divergent hallux, which would suggest to me that it still spends a lot of time in the trees. But there are also descriptions of orang pendek footprints that look kind of like smaller human footprints. There is no divergent hallux. It looks like a sort of broader human footprint, just a little bit smaller. I have two answers for this. One of them is sun bear. If you see a sun bear footprint, it looks very similar to a human footprint. Absolutely it does. Another sort of theory of mine is that if you look at a gibbon's foot, its grasping toe, its divergent big toe, is very long, because they are so arboreal. A gibbon with its foot flat like this, with that toe, if it closed it, that toe would come pretty high, that divergent big toe. It would almost line up with the rest of their toes. So if you have a gibbon walking bipedally depending on the terra firma, the ground it's walking on, it would have to put that toe in different areas. You know, for example, if it was walking on something muddy, it might put that toe further out to get more balance. It might close it in if it's walking through thick scrub because that toe might get caught on things. You see where I'm getting at? That toe can move, which could explain the difference in some of the footprints that we see. Just a theory, but it does make sense. Also, some of the vocalizations that people describe from the orang pendek sounds awfully gibbon-like rather than orangutan-like. You know, that hooting sound. That is exactly what the eyewitness I interviewed described as well. All these little things are just suggesting to me that the orang pendek probably evolved from the gibbon lineage rather than the orangutan lineage, because gibbons are in this superfamily called Hominoidea. And then you get your great apes, which are your bonobos, chimps, gorillas, which are hominids, hominidae. And then you get subfamilies, which is Ponginae with the orangutan. You get families that branch off from that superfamily, which is the gibbons, Hylobatidae, things like that. So apes have split and diverged quite far back. Depending on where the orang pendek split from and how far back it split from that lineage of hylobatids, we don't know. It's very hard to presume any of these things when we don't have any biological evidence of the orang pendek, apart from an interesting hair that I believe was analyzed in, I want to say Denmark or Netherlands, somewhere like that, and showed that it was an ape that we might not have discovered yet. It was pretty fascinating. The eDNA samples. A lot of people in the comments asked about the eDNA samples. Now, the reason why I didn't hold much hope for the eDNA samples was because there are no orang pendek DNA in their DNA databank. So it's got nothing to compare it to. How can you match with something that isn't on their databank? The reason why I did the eDNA samples was if the orang pendek was closely related to an orangutan or an orangutan type ancestor, it may show orangutan DNA in that sample, which would be very interesting because we know orangutans don't live in West Sumatra. So if we got a positive match of orangutans in that area, it might be a clue that there is an ape that isn't an orangutan but closely related living in that jungle. We didn't get orangutan DNA. We did get gibbon DNA. We got siamang DNA. So that was the purpose of the eDNA. Didn't hold much hope for it, but it did rule out something that there weren't orangutans or something closely related to orangutans in that area of jungle. So what are my plans going forward? I really want to pursue this. I'm going to continue doing expeditions to Sumatra to look for orang pendek. I'm going to utilize certain methods. Obviously, camera traps are a big thing when it comes to looking for very elusive animals. They are imperative to this. So obviously I just want to bomb the place with camera traps, but the legalities of that I hear are pretty difficult. Getting permits to do that is very hard because ideally I'd want to put out like 50 camera traps throughout certain areas of the jungle and leave them for 6 months, even a year, come back, collect them, go through all the footage. If I can solve the problem of the permits and, you know, dealing with the Indonesian government in doing this, then I will absolutely do that. But that's not going to stop me from continuing to go there to look for it. No way. Even if that is a longer process and takes longer to achieve. I'm still going to go out there on expeditions looking for and utilizing other methods. I want to use audio to maybe try and lure something closer, something that's curious as to what these calls are. It's going to take a lot of tampering with vocalizations from gibbons, orangutans, maybe lowering it a little bit, making it higher, just something that might match the described calls of the orang pendek that might get an orang pendek curious enough to come in and check it out. Obviously, if I accidentally drop a couple camera traps around those areas, you know, whoops. But I do have methods that I do want to incorporate. Obviously, people will say, why don't you try and lure it in with something that smells or something like this, pheromones, something like that. My issue with that is apes' olfactory senses, so their sense of smell, isn't that great. It's not that much different to a human's. Obviously your strepsirrhines, so your wet-nosed primates like lemurs and lorises and things like that, they have a better olfactory sense because they are reliant on scent glands, things like that. As apes evolved, our brains grew bigger, apes became more intelligent, they became more visual, so their sense of smell became more suppressed over time. They didn't need to rely on that as much. So drawing in animals like apes with scented things, it does work to a certain degree, the same way as if you walk your dog at a certain time, you can smell what each house is cooking. So I will incorporate certain things like that, but I'm not going to heavily rely on that. I think vocalizations and just finding areas of interest and, you know, scoping out those areas will be far more beneficial. I also want to check out deeper parts of the jungle, areas that are pretty hard to get to. I have a lot of experience in the jungle. I've spent a lot of time in there. I want to go deep into that jungle, okay? That's what I want to do. And a lot of the comments were people trying to give me advice on the jungle. And you know what? Most of these people have never stepped foot in a jungle in their life. So they would never know. The situations change. You've got to adapt to the situation. Trust me, I'm okay. Okay, all right. I've been in the jungle a lot of times. I've spent weeks at a time in the jungle by myself. In fact, one time I was in the jungle in Malaysia by myself in a tent, pretty damn deep, and something at night kept pushing on my head through the tent. I was like, what is going on? It felt like a human hand, or like a hand pushing on my head through the tent. I'm like, what the hell's going on? I'm turning on my flashlight and trying to shoo whatever it was, but it kept on doing it, pushing my head through the tent. Next morning I came out and there was tiger footprints all around my tent. Okay? So yeah, it can be pretty scary at times, but I love it, okay? So that is my plan. And I will note as well, the late Jeffrey Meldrum. I emailed him the 3D scans of the footprints. Rest in peace, Jeffrey Meldrum. He was a very important figure in cryptozoology, especially looking at the morphology of feet with bipedal hominoids like Sasquatches and Yetis, Yeren, stuff like that. I sent him the 3D scan of the footprint and he thought it was very interesting. So that was a really cool nod of approval coming from somebody like Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum. It was really cool. I love that email. I want to focus on the orang pendek, but I also want to investigate other cryptid apes. I want to go to South Africa, spend a lot of time in South Africa, guiding safaris and expeditions. I want to go to the Knysna forest and check out the otang, which is another bipedal hominid that is said to live in the Afro-montane forest of South Africa, the Knysna forest. And there has been very credible sightings of the otang. So Stay tuned, there is going to be a lot more exciting expeditions that I'm going to do for cryptid apes. And also there's going to be videos in between of interesting animal stuff and things like that. So I hope that gave you a little bit more insight into that orang pendek expedition, and stay tuned, follow along, because who knows, I might find that ape. Take care everyone, I'll see you next time on another episode of Thorn's Jungle.